Welcome back to the Reading with Ryan podcast, episode 6, going into summer. It is beautiful outside. We read an amazing book that I am so excited to talk about. How are you today, Ryan?
I'm pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Loving summer and excited about my Mariners repping the hat.
Love it.
Yep. They're doing pretty well. Just lost the series. They haven't lost the series in quite a while, but we are doing well with the Mariners and having a good time.
That's a little prequel of your new sports podcast that's dropping here soon.
Oh, yeah. A little summer sports podcast.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
This is our first episode that we're both, well, you're always drinking iced coffee. This is my first episode with drinking iced coffee.
I actually have a LaCroix over
you've
here.
migrated to a different beverage.
Yeah. It was in the fridge and I was like, that looks good. I'll have
Absolutely. It's refreshing.
Yeah.
Well, let's hop in. This month's book, The Life We're Looking For by Andy Crouch, someone who we deeply appreciate from afar. I don't know him personally. I don't think you do.
Nope.
But a book that I think we both cherished. And so we'll get into the reviews and do that whole thing. But I just want to say as a little prequel, this is my favorite book of the year so far. So depending on where things go this fall, and if we keep recording episodes, who knows, that might change. But so far, The Life We're Looking For gets a good review.
I thought it was a great book. I mean, as is our practice, we give it a number and we give it a name. So give me your number.
5 out of 5.
5 out of 5 for you. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so hard for me to be that committed. But tell me your word.
No, you got to. We go
want my
points.
number?
Points first.
Yeah, 4.5 out of 5. I really liked it.
Love it.
Yeah, just because I'm really hesitant to give something a 5 out of 5. It's got to just be crispy in every way. My word for the book would be eloquent. I just really like him as an author.
Yeah.
So not only do I like the content, I think that he has an important message to share. He also writes a book. I haven't read it, but I think Tracy, our kids director, has The Tech-Wise Family.
Oh, yes.
And I think maybe you've read that book. He maybe has a few other books even as well. I'm not sure like the total library of his writings, but yeah, I think I like Andy Crouch because he has got great content, but I also like the way he writes. I just think he writes like with a unique combination of intellect and poetry. So it's like effective, but it's also reflective.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Yep.
I tend to be a little more on the reflective, contemplative side of the spectrum there.
Yeah.
So when people write very scholastically, or it seems like they're very informed intellectually, I enjoy that. When people write really artistically and poetically, I don't like it as much. It doesn't bother me, but he feels like an interesting combination of just like just substantive and sultry.
Yes.
Like at the same time, which is I'd be curious to know. I don't know his like educational background. Let me just start by this. I was introduced to Andy Crouch actually in 2020.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know who he was. In March of 2020, right when COVID kind of hit the news waves in Washington State, and we got kind of that afternoon, I'll never forget, here at the church office where we're all, our staff's like huddled around a computer, like, what just happened? Like, is church canceled this Sunday? Like, what? I remember Andy Crouch having an article that he wrote that kind of did the rounds. I read the article in that first week and then passed the article along to our board of elders. And in that article, he basically was saying a lot of you want to believe this is a blizzard that's just like blown into town and it's got 4 feet of snow outside your door and you'll be locked in your house for the weekend. That's that. But I hate to break it to you. Like, I don't think this is that. And then he goes, some of you think this is just going to be like, a few weeks. Like, it's just going to be like a stint. And he's like, this is a prolonged season. In fact, this is going to feel like winter extended all the way through summer and back around to the next winter. And so I found it very, very convincing. I thought he was persuasive, a lot of data, but he's also a persuasive writer. I shared that with our board. And I think that was kind of met with like what? That's when all of us were like 2 weeks to what was it? Flatten the curve or whatever we were doing. It's like, yeah, that didn't work. And, I also shared with some pastor friends, even to this day, of which now I'm told that if another world catastrophe happens, they're going to call me because I must be connected to some prescient folks. Because I was kind of in the corner of like, nah, this is a bigger, longer, more contracted thing. Like so I found Andy's work persuasive. So he was actually the kind of the source of that for me. And that was my first introduction to his work and kind of like who he is and what he does. And yeah, I'm trying to remember. It was connected to like I don't think he's with them anymore. It was either like an organization or a website or some sort of thinking group, Christian group.
Well, he works for Praxis.
Okay.
Which could have been.
That might have been what it was from.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was just my first introduction. Then kind of found out he had other books. And then this book, interestingly, was recommended to me, maybe beyond recommendation. It was like forced, but a voluntary force from Dr. Jerry Sitzer. He had all the pastors read this book about maybe a year or two ago. So this was the second go, and I find it to be compelling. I really think it's a great book. In fact, a guy in our church asks me periodically for individual reading recommendations. This was maybe a year ago. I recommended this book. I think he said to me, if I remember right, this was one of his favorites as well. It's just a very, very good book. So anyway, my word is eloquent. My score is 4.5.
Love it. 5 out of 5. My word is grounded, and I almost chose the word stabilizing. And the reason being is I've experienced this emotion with being around you a lot. When you're around a lot of truth, a lot of like high level wisdom, what it tends to do is it destabilizes things almost in a
Destabilizes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Almost like a positive version of deconstruction, where what it does is it makes you examine everything you think, and for a brief moment you have this almost like this anxiety or this twinge of like, is what I think correct? And I think that is some of the result of just good teaching. Like good teaching is convicting, and it does that. But with Andy's work, and specifically the life we're looking for, there are some things that we'll get into around technology, around AI, around the messaging of these things that at times give people anxiety. Like, is this going to take over the world? And Andy comes at it from kind of this like theologian, social scientist perspective, and weaves in poetic language and kind of leaves you with like some warm and fuzzies. Like,
yeah. I'm jealous. I want to be Andy. I don't want to be a destabilizer, Sean. Gosh, thanks. That's why I thought you misspoke. You're like, yeah, I hang around you a lot. And so what I would describe that as is like, you know, very truth oriented. So it's like very destabilizing. I'm like, do you mean stabilizing? No. I mean destabilizing. Oh, okay.
Momentarily.
Okay. Yes.
Bumping into
Reforming.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Correct. See, if Andy was here, just like the book does, that he has great language, he would have said what I just said better than me. So he would have written it way better.
Okay.
So
I like your choice of words. Okay. I like that. I do think it's grounding. I think that he's maybe so a book I'm in the process of reading right now is Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and that might be more destabilizing. That's getting a lot of controversial pushback, but it's just trying to shine a light on why the emerging generations post the iPhone of 2007 and then eventually really the 2010 teen years has seen an uptick of almost 100% in like young person suicide and mental health issues and all sorts of chaos. Like the phones are a problem. And so that seems very, I get it. It's like a prophet's work. A prophet's work is to destabilize, to make you question your sources because they're probably idolatrous.
Yes.
Whereas he kind of comes up next to you and does that. But I think his approach leaves, it's almost like the Velvet Hammer. It leaves you feeling like this guy just told me I'm basically doing a lot of this wrong.
Yep.
But made me feel really comfortable and hopeful.
Yeah.
About doing that.
Correct. Correct.
It's a good skill.
It's a very good skill. Now, little tidbit. You and I actually read this book once before. This is our second time through. And so I just want to say that this time through, I physically read the book, which is different than the first time I read it. I used Audible. And little sidebar here. Audible's great. Love listening to books. Think it's awesome. However, this is one of those books that like pencil and highlighter in hand, you can learn a lot more from. At least my learning style. So
I read it on a Kindle. So what does that mean?
You're hybrid. You're a hybrid. You have a net out here of some ideas that we're excited to get into, some big takeaways. Before we get there, I just want to open it up for any ideas, maybe the language or new things Andy introduced us to, kind of before we get into the key tenets of his book. And I can go first.
Yeah, go for it.
I think one of the things that he's doing here in this book is he's really challenging the net benefit of technology. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things he does. And that comes out of his other book, The TechWise Family. But just right off the gate within the first chapter, he poses this idea of personalization versus personal. Mm-hmm. And our world is just riddled with this. And the example he gave was an individual who got a handwritten letter. Yeah. And this handwritten letter obviously was actually a computer. It was some sort of, Comic Sans type font. That
posing.
Right. It says, "Dear Andy, you've recently been pre-approved." We've all got these letters. But man, isn't that not the truth? That technology has personalized things, but it hasn't actually made things more personal.
Yeah, that's a great use of language.
So good. Mm-hmm. I love that. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think it requires wisdom. I think that the reason why this book is so important is it requires wisdom. And shockingly, Andy doesn't take an approach that you'd expect the destabilizing prophet to take, which is like get rid of all your technology and burn your phones. Or to use the example of the Roomba, mm-hmm. the vacuum that vacuums all on its own. Like he owns a Roomba.
Right.
How's that for interesting?
Right.
It's like, imagine the guy who's telling you, watch out for smartphones, telling you that from a smartphone. Or again, think about what we're doing right now. The two individuals sitting in a room recording something via technology, disseminating it over the internet for people's phones, apps, and all their easy, convenient consumption, but telling people to watch out for how that benefit could end up becoming a net negative if they don't use wisdom on how to manage those tools. So what I like about Andy is he's very intellectually, theologically. I would say this. And I love this. There's people in the world that ask the question, "How does this work?" There's people in the world that ask the question, "Why does this work?" There's people in the world that ask the question, "What's underneath all of this?" And he's more in that camp. It's kind of like helping you understand what's underneath this, so that you know how to approach this. Mm-hmm. I resonate with that just from a personality perspective. Yeah. My wife and I are very different in that way. Like even recently when I preach and I was like, "Hey, how did you think that was?" She's like, "Well, it was great, but you didn't really tell us enough of what to do." And I'm like, "Well, I always tend to struggle with that. Like I'm trying to help you understand what's underneath something." Mm-hmm. And I'm not as naturally inclined to go, "Okay, now here's how to do this, that, or the other." And I feel like what Andy does in his book is, yes, there are some practical helps, but it's really more giving people framework of thought and language to understand what's happening, what's mm-hmm. underneath all of that. So in a personalizing world, it might not be more personal. In a technologically advancing world, there might need to be a distinction drawn between devices and instruments. Mm. And we might need to be able to recognize when we're using each type and when we're not okay with what it brings us versus what it takes from us.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really a really helpful thought. So here's what I would say too about this. This book, here's another thought for me. This book is for full-blown adults.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
It's like an adult comes alongside you and says, "I'm not going to baby you. Yep. I'm not going to give you quick fixes. I'm not going to give you easy solutions," right? Like, just get rid of all your technology. What I am going to do is I'm going to invite you and respect your intellect, respect your intelligence, respect your agency, respect the complexity of this, and I'm going to invite you to make a healthy and wise decision. Mm. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's like, not exactly how I would treat my 7-year-old. I don't have one, but I did. I have a 10-year-old, my youngest. But as kids age, it is the way you'd approach your 18-year-old. It is the way you'd approach a peer. It's kind of like, "Hey, let me walk you through. There's more to this than you think. Let me help you think through it."
Yeah. And you just teed up the next thing so brilliantly.
Well, thank you.
Because what Andy goes into next is he's talking about the Shema, and he's talking about the four dimensions. And I think that's what you mean is there's a part of our personhood that matures in time because the dimensions aren't fully realized.
Yeah.
I think it's the average male doesn't finish puberty. I mean, for me, this was yesterday. So I'm not even qualified to talk on this
It's
subject.
the brain, the male brain, particularly, I think it's the frontal lobe, just some neuroscience, doesn't like fully develop till 25.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I still
And
feel
yet we're letting young men drive at 16, drink alcohol at 21.
yeah.
Maybe that's not a good idea. Anyway, but again, there's a perfect illustration. Therefore, let's draw these lines.
Correct.
And I think it's not that those are bad, but it's like let's wrestle with what's going on here and what it really means to be human. And this is where it gets down to where he connects it so like psychologically and anthropologically and theologically. Like what does it really mean to be human, and what's our greatest need? Like what does human flourishing really mean?
Yes.
And I think if you were to ask, like, what's the thesis of the book? It's that. It's what does it really mean to be human and really thrive as humans in human culture? And it's not an escape from the advance of culture, because to do that, you have to go live under a rock. But you can't live with your eyes closed and not scrutinizing that the things that we make might not make us better.
Oof. Yes. And that's what the heart of the Shema is, that we are mind, we are heart, we are soul, we are strength. And so easily
and Shema, let's help everybody.
Yes.
Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one, and worship the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength.
And this was a plaque that people would put above their door.
Yep.
And this was the commandment. And so as we take in new technologies and embrace new ways of doing things, it has been easy. And I think this is almost switching books a little bit, but you already mentioned it, The Anxious Generation, and another book that we might read at some point.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good one.
But we have said yes to certain pieces of technology without thinking about the way that they would atrophy either our soul or our mind or our heart. And Andy's, what he's contending for here is saying we must think about those four dimensions.
Yep, it's great. Yeah, it's so good.
Let's talk about superpowers.
Okay.
I just thought that this section was incredible. And this kind of gets into some of what is the tenet of the book. I'm just going to read this.
Yep.
Here's the problem. You cannot take advantage of a superpower and fully remain a person in the sense of a heart, soul, mind, strength complex designed for love. And then just to define this, it is in the essence of their design because superpowers are power without effort. Wow. And this is one of the gifts of, I think, who Andy is he gives language to things so simply.
Definitely.
What do you think of that? Power without effort.
I think he's just, like you said, a good word, grounding our humanity and just recognizing, like, if we're not careful, I mean, how much of this is its own echo of what Jesus goes through in the temptations from Satan? You know what I'm saying? It's like Jesus is fully human, but he's fully God. So at some level, he could just go superpower and reject the human part and take the quick part, but instead he plays out the human story as a model and as a substitute for our failures ultimately on the cross. And I think that component of power, of recognizing if there's not human effort and sacrifice and pace to it, it's probably erasing part of us. I mean, this book really does dovetail well with like the AI concept. It even dovetails interestingly well with recent sermons in Revelation on Babylon and kind of the spirit of Babylon and what it is and what it does. And it erases human dignity and this element of our composition, which you already mentioned, heart, soul, mind, strength. It degrades, and not everything is neutral. There can be ways of utilizing things where it's a combination of like enhancement, but not an erasure of human reality. But anytime we do something that is very little effort, but yields incredibly outsized results, it becomes a trap. It becomes an idol. It becomes an addiction.
Yeah. So let's get into an example really quick, because I think this one you'll find interesting. So he says that a superpower is something, and you would use this word, that diminishes us but delights us. And the example that comes to mind right now is the superpower of listening to podcasts. And this sounds so funny, and it's ironic because we're recording one, but I think we just should call ourselves out on it.
Yeah.
And what I mean by this is, there are plenty of times where I'm like, man, I listened to like 5 sermons this week. Pat on the back. But the irony is like, did that form me at all? Did it change my heart? Did it move the needle of the kingdom?
Yeah.
Did it do anything?
Yeah.
Other than simply
Delight me.
Delight the fleshly side of me, which is to say, oh no, I can tell others that like, oh, I listened to 5 sermons this week.
Yeah. Well, think about this for a second. And it not only can delude you in the present reality of things, it can also make you very, very vulnerable in the future. So let me explain. In a world in which everyone can have a microphone and everyone can have a platform and everyone can have a podcast, how do you know who to really listen to? I would suggest you should double down on the people you know in the flesh. And this is why this podcast for me is targeted towards my own church. I'm not trying to build a platform to people that have never met me or don't ever have a chance to meet me. I want to double down on the instrument of a podcast to help me have more chances to talk to people that know me and that I know them in the flesh.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's bad to be someone that has a platform that can reach people. I'm just saying I think you have to be careful, because what do you do when all of a sudden you think someone's amazing because you've listened to their podcast, but the truth is you don't know that person at all? Does that make sense? So it not only delights us in the present, but then deludes us or diminishes our humanity and makes us maybe feeds maybe a conquering, proud side of our acquisition of knowledge without the acquisition of wisdom. But on the same time, it also has the potential, not the guarantee, but the potential to make us vulnerable, because we could end up listening to people or voices or things that we think, we make assumptions. We fill in all the gaps. Oh, I'm sure they're a great parent. I'm sure they're a great dad. I'm sure they're a great Christian. I'm sure they're a great pastor. I'm sure they're a great everything. It's like, well, you don't know anything about them.
Yeah.
So like, I do think we have to be careful. While, again, technology can do a lot of great things, we have to recognize what it can't do. Yep. It cannot replace human relationship. It cannot replace human to human connection. It cannot replace that. And to the degree you allow it to is to the degree in which it diminishes you and deludes you with this narrative of superpower.
Yeah.
Which is tough.
It is tough.
And it's a fine line. It's a tightrope walk. I feel like I'm walking in my life, and I'm walking it as a leader in the church in 2024.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had those questions like, should we just eliminate online church at all? Like, COVID's not here anymore. Like, do we need it at all? Who's tuning in? How is it helping them? Is it an invitation? Is it a further step? Like, should we keep doing a podcast? Like, is the podcast replacing human to human relationship, or is it enhancing it? Is it allowing people who already know each other to be more effective and go further, or is it unhealthfully substituting something that's essential?
Yeah.
I mean, those are all the questions. And I just think what I like about Ant, I don't think he legalistically told you what you can and can't do. I think in wisdom, he told you should think about everything you do.
And notice that he doesn't, all the examples we just came up with that just filled the conversation, he didn't give us. He didn't give us of the example of the pastor who had the moral failure after building a huge platform. And those are things, this quote, like church rot, like as what's his name from New York, took over Pete Scazzero's church.
Rich Villodas.
Rich Villodas wrote a book on the flourishing life, and part of it is how to avoid the rot of the soul. And one of the points that he draws out is it is the superpower of technology that has made it so that the listener or the viewer has placed more pressure, more expectation on the preacher than they were ever meant to hold. Yep. And then when their life blows up, then the individual who listened,
their shrapnel is a lot wider.
Shrapnel.
Yeah.
But back to the book. That would have never happened. Well, it would have never happened in that way if it wasn't for the superpower of technology.
Yep.
Just crazy.
So talk to me about Gaius. Talk to me, Sean, about his part of the book where he basically, as I understand, my takeaway, we need to be fully human. We need to be known, recognized, and connected and flourishing in heart, soul, mind, and strength. This is the Shema. This is God's will and instruction for humanity. But the trade out of technology is creating maybe a lot more net negatives than I want to admit. And we need to be restored to a community and engaging our heart, mind, soul, and strength to each other. So he outlines this whole kind of concept of true community, which is to be known and fully known. And he uses an example in the Bible from Romans chapter 16. Remember that?
Yes. So if I recall correctly, Gaius was sitting at the table and he had an opportunity to chime in on the letter that Paul was writing. Is that
so? No, you got to look close. Gaius was a wealthy household owner who had a church in his house.
right?
But Romans chapter 16 is this list of names. So let me just kind of let me window everybody.
Please.
Let me window everybody into something I just did with our entire staff because of reading this book. At our last all staff, so just a window for people that are part of True Up Church, like your church staff, once a month, we have a staff chapel where we worship and pray together and have like a devotional and we do some spiritual practices. And then another Tuesday on the month, I lead an all staff leadership development moment. So we have our entire staff together. So this last one, I did this book. I said, hey, I'm reading this book. I'm going to record a podcast on it with Sean, but I just want to talk about kind of the high level concepts of the book. And I'm going to invite us to reflect on it together as we are pursuing a goal this year of really trying to grow in our vitality of community groups and community-based connection at True Up Church. We have our consultants working with our team. We're trying to really not just increase the amount of groups, but the health of our groups, realizing as much as our church has grown, this is an area we thought as a team, if there's one thing we could do to really make True Up Church significantly healthier, what would it be? And we're we need double community groups and double people engaged in them, and they need to be healthier. And so we're working on all that. So my instruction to our staff was, hey, as we pursue the logistics of that, right? Trainings and on-ramps and off-ramps and more clarity and building out structure and recruiting leaders and recruiting coaches and emphasizing this and modeling this, I want to provide you with high-level language to help people wrestle with why this is so important. So here's what I had him do. I had one of our staff, I said, I want you to open your Bible to Romans 16 and I want you to read. So I started reading and it almost felt like I picked on him because there's so many names like Erastus and, all these tough names. So here's what we counted though. We went through the chapter as a staff, either directly or by reference and allusion, like so-and-so's mom or dad or grandma or whatever. At least 45 names are recorded in chapter 16 of Paul's letter to the Romans. He makes a very interesting note, Andy Crouch does, about Gaius and that he had a table where he had a church that met in his house, that it was cross-gender. It was, what I mean by cross-gender is men and women. It was different ethnicities, different economic stations, slave-free. And he points this out by a little known detail at the very end of chapter 16. Someone named Tertius.
Is that how you say it?
Yeah. How did you think you're going to say
I was going to say Tertius.
Yeah. So Tertius is the one who actually is writing the letter. So Paul, there's also Quartus and Secundus. And those names, we at first think, I don't know, it's Rome, it's some other language, who knows? No, that's literally an indication of slave status because their social location was so meager. Their name was second, third, and fourth. Be like naming your kids 1, 2, 3, and 4. They don't even get a name. They just get a number. And what he basically draws out from that is, hey, it's interesting that Tertius, that's understood historically to be a slave name for third. Society viewed that person, because of their social location, with such little importance, they'd only be notated as significant by the order of their birth. And yet, Paul writes a letter, so it's impressive that the Apostle Paul knows 45 people by name, firstly. And then he enjoys Tertius, a slave, being the one who's allowed to say, hey, I'm the writer here. I'm the one that's dictating, or Paul's dictating to me, and I'm writing this. And the importance of showing that he sits at an equal place as someone like Gaius. Gaius was a wealthy household owner. So Gaius is at the top of the social ladder. Tertius is at the bottom of the social ladder. There's men, there's women. There's this kind of picture is that even though the society around us is putting people in boxes and casting some aside, look at the beautiful community reflected here.
Yeah.
And I think what he's trying to point out there is like, look, that's what we're going after. But don't assume that some of the tools and technologies in our lives are helping us do this. They might be hurting us more than we think.
Yeah. I love that. Not slave, but guest. And that Tertius, there we go, got it. He was looked at and Paul's like, hey, what do you want to say now? And the fact that he's even given that opportunity, it's indicative of the diversity of the body of Christ that we're blessed to be a part of. So one of Andy's ideas that he throws out, and I say all ideas, and they really aren't, they're more than ideas because he writes with such confidence, but they were new to me, so that's why I say ideas, is mammon. And I'm sure you've preached sermons on mammon, and that word has been used from the pulpit. But wow, if I was to take a quiz before I read this book, I would have said that mammon was the same thing as money, and it isn't. Can you explain that?
I mean, it can encompass it. It's a spirit. It's the spirit of worldly. I don't know how connected would you say? Were you at the my last message on Babylon? Oh, you watched it online?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's this world self-dependent against God. I don't recall his exact definition, but yes, I understand mammon is much bigger than just money.
Mammon is not simply money, but the anti-God impetus that finds its power in money.
Yeah.
And what it wants above all is to separate power from a relationship, abundance from dependence, and being from personhood.
Totally. Yeah, I think you have a lot of those references and allusions in scripture, like Babylon and mammon. It's understanding the spiritual war, the spiritual dimension behind the utility of the function in front of you, right? That it's not just about that. It's not just about money. It's not just about transaction. It's about a spiritual thing that's behind it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Jesus said you cannot serve God and
Money.
Mammon. He said mammon. Because it wouldn't make sense for him to say money.
Right.
You can't serve God, the spiritual entity that grounds all things in truth, beauty, and love, and the spiritual entity that tries to separate you from your original purpose and intent, tries to stratify you, tries to, you know what I'm saying? That makes sense. You can't serve God and mammon.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, got that. That makes sense.
Yeah, the spirit of mammon comes alive through money. It's similarly to use your sermon that the spirit of Babylon can be seen in America, but America is not Babylon.
Right. Sure. The nations, I hope not in the future eschatological sense, but I think it's just to recognize this spiritual battle that's being described. So yeah, mammon becomes an influence we have to reckon with. It's fueling underneath the surface a lot of things. When does he get into the device versus instruments comparison? Is that further on?
That's coming up real quick.
Okay.
So we want to jump to?
Yeah, I just think that's fascinating. This would be one of the things that was one of my greatest takeaways from the book.
Yeah.
So much so that when you and I recorded a podcast, we were somewhere in Genesis. We were still talking about devices. That came up multiple times. And I think what that reminds me of when I first read Andy's book is that stuck with me.
Yeah.
That was something that really landed. And so I want to make sure that people understand what's going on there. He distinguishes the difference between a device and an instrument. And he basically defines them this way. A device is something that's so easy. It makes something so easy that essentially humans are no longer required. A Roomba is a device, right? It tidies up the room. You didn't have to think about it. You forgot it was house cleaning hour because something else was doing it entirely. And while at the surface level, that seems like an unqualified positive. Like when Yes, I no longer have to do a bunch of dumb, boring, time-consuming, difficult tasks I used to have to do. The danger there is they sometimes have unforeseen consequences, and we usually adapt our lives around them. In other words, they change us. They don't just help us. They change us. See that? Now that is getting to the root of the question. Is the iPhone helpful? Yeah. Is it changing us? I think it is. How? We're figuring that out. Does the Roomba help us? Yes. Does it change us? Yeah, but probably less than an iPhone, right? So anyway, I just think this concept of device is very important. And he contrasts that with another beautifully chosen word, eloquent, instrument. And he uses the example of a bike, which we can relate to, or you use an example of something, a musical instrument, that it enhances and enables you to do something you otherwise couldn't do at that capacity, but it still requires your full engagement bodily and mentally and your full effort. You can't, like, I'll give you an example. I'm going to promote something I like. Golf. Golf is a game of instruments. It is not a game of devices. Put a golf club in your hand and you will see that you haven't spent as much time with that as if you put a golf club in our music pastor's hand, Kyle, who's the best golfer on our staff. Right? I'm not trying to like throw you under the bus, but that's true. You're like not loving that.
Yeah.
My point is, if we put a pitching wedge in your hand and a pitching wedge in Kyle's hand, we're not going to get the same result.
No.
Why is that? It's an instrument. It's not a device.
Right.
If you put an iPhone in my hand and in your hand, and we just had to press play on YouTube, what's the result comparison? Nearly identical. I mean, it's that easy. And his argument is instruments actually enrich our lives.
Yeah.
Devices have a tendency to suck life from us. And I'm like, oh, that is crazy. So there's this I love this concept. He basically invites all of us to think through. There's something, the way we sell technology culturally is we say, look, now you can never vacuum again. Right? So now you can do X, and that means you no longer have to do Y. And he's like, but the thing you have to remember is if you say yes to that, eventually you won't be able to do X and you will no longer want to do Y. And this is the equation we have to reckon with, which is the cost. It's the net negative. It's like, how might that change me?
Yeah.
And then beyond me, because we're not just parroting individualism religion. How does that affect my human soul, strength, body? Like, how does that affect the Shema? How does that affect me being fully human and being able to live in community with other people being fully human?
Yeah.
That's what we got to wrestle with.
All right, let's make it personal.
Okay.
What is your favorite instrument that you own or have? And what is something in the relatively recent years that's been a device that you've become convicted or aware of? I'll ask the question too.
Yeah. My favorite instrument? Oh, man. I would probably say the bicycle. I would. And the second to that would be
The e-bicycle or
all shapes and sizes, brother. I would say the other one would be the golf club, but I've always loved that instrument. But the bicycle for me, I found that during COVID, it was hugely therapeutic and helpful, helped me be more human. And so that's probably my favorite instrument. And then I would say device. Oh gosh, it's certainly my iPhone, and it's particularly, I think it's the branch of social media that's Twitter. It's information. It's a gateway to information, and I love knowing. And on one hand, knowing is learning, which is wonderful, but on some hand, knowing is also insecure armor building to make me feel like I'm secure in a place that is so rapidly changing I wish I just kind of knew more of what was going on so I could feel safe.
Yeah.
That's definitely my device problem.
Yeah. Well, I'm there with you. My favorite instrument that I own is actually it looks old, but it's new, is my Fujifilm camera. And I find I've loved photography for, most of my life, but being able to take images of my family and travel without it being my phone.
Yeah.
You remove.
Interesting.
Do you see what I'm saying there?
I do.
So you remove yourself from your phone, and now you're just bound by your shutter speed and your aperture and your ISO, and you're creating. You're being creative.
Such a fascinating trade, how much it's like now we don't need all these things because the phone can do everything. But now we're starting to realize the problem with having one thing do everything is that when we want to do something, we're always connected to everything else.
Yes. That was excellent quote.
Yeah.
Highlight
like that. It's almost
asterisk.
like it's the device delusion. But if we had something that replaced everything, wouldn't that be nice? You'd think, until you realize that when you've replaced everything, you're actually never not connected to everything.
Yes.
And that's actually an endless torment.
Yes. The device, it is smartphone adjacent, but I'm actually going to say wearable technology. And for me, it was 3 years of, it looked like a smartwatch, doesn't have a screen, but it's called a Whoop.
Whoopity whoop.
And it was the promise of having unlimited information and data on my own being, yet not realizing that I would live in the torment of feeling like I was never doing enough. I was never exercising enough. I was never, and so it was taking data and what it did to my own soul. It made me feel like I needed to be busier than I needed to be.
Interesting.
It didn't lead to health like it promised.
Yeah. Fascinating. Led to an over obsession with health.
Right.
Which then led to other things to explore.
Yeah. And then all the add-ons, all the things you can buy once it tells you that you're not enough. Right. So anyways, the ultimate device.
And some mammon attached to that, right?
Oh yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes. Isn't that interesting?
It's just interesting, man. Wow.
So let's talk about impact and influence. And I just want to say, because I got this little teaser from a friend who happened to go to a conference that Andy was speaking at. This is what his next book is about.
Really?
So it is literally about this point. So we're going to talk about it, but I just want to say, if we're doing this podcast in the future and this book comes out, we're reading it.
Okay.
Impact and influence. So impact, as traditionally defined, and we use it, I would almost say we misuse the word, is what Andy would be contending, is impact's a negative thing. Impact is what happens when a war comes through a city, a town, a culture.
Yep.
What else there?
Yeah. An asteroid, a meteor.
Right.
Impact is when something too fast, too big, without enough preparation hits you in a way that you couldn't escape. Impact. And yet, we've now traded that word. All of our popular influencers want to lead with impact.
Right.
And impact has now become, he uses this, he says, it's the goal of moving fast and breaking things. And that's lauded. Right?
Yep.
That's like amazing. You're a disruptor. You're an innovator. You're an impact whatever. It's like, I get it. I'm not trying to throw everybody under the bus that uses that term. I'm not saying... I think we have to be careful. I'm not trying to be mean, but he argues impact is short-lived. And then here's the challenge with impact. Once it's done, you need another one. Another hit. Right? So impact is quick, it's fast, it breaks things. It has, it's just, that's what that word means. But yet a lot of us are trying to live our lives impact driven.
Right.
And I think he just so eloquently argues for, hey, how about a different word here, which is influence?
Yeah.
And influence is a word that isn't quite as popular, but it's slower. It's slower. And here's the thing. This was the thing I told our staff, by the way, at this little staff, all staff training and meeting we did. I said, here's the thing you need to know about impact and influence. It's not, in my opinion, that we should say impact is always bad. Impact is just indicating that in a quick amount of time, there's been a noticeable or almost an inability to not notice how something has affected you. But let me just point this out to you. The most important things, the most important relationships in your life have nothing to do with impact. They have everything to do with influence. You have influence on your kids. I was talking to our team also about people in our church who've been here for a long time. There are people who've been at Trope Church for a year or two, and they might say, man, they feel very impacted by maybe our teaching or the culture, or they came to faith in Christ, or they got baptized. It was impactful. I get that. I get the language. I think we have to be careful to like go, oh, that's a curse word. We should never use it. But what we're going for is influence. And the only way you get influence, it's all through time. It's all through longevity. You can't influence someone in a setting, in a sitting, in a moment. You can't.
Yeah.
And so I just think there's a component there that is just rich. It's a nice balance, again, of language, of helping people realize like, influence is the long game.
Oh, it is.
And impact is the short game. And it's not to say there aren't moments that are impactful, right? Let me try to explain. So when Emma got her wheelchair, that had impact. But the voice of her mother, her father, and her friends and her family will be the influence, not that moment. Does that make sense? Like there's things that impact you, but the things that really have potency are the things that influence you because they stay with you.
Yeah.
There's a longevity to it. So I just think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think going back to our conversation about devices, in 2007, the iPhone came out. That was an impactful moment. But every year since then, we have a annual Apple event, and everyone's like, you ready for the most impactful event of the year? It's like nothing can compare to the very first time.
No.
And what Andy is talking about, to your point, is a more slow, more sustainable, more consistent type of presence, which is influence. And he would go as far to say that even the psalmist and Jesus himself used agricultural metaphors to describe human life.
Yeah.
And I just thought this was fascinating. He said, generally, a single olive tree takes 8 years of cultivation before it even produces a single olive.
Yeah. The slow, faithful.
The mustard
route.
seed.
Yeah. And it compounds, which is another point I think you made. I think that's beautiful. Like there's a compounding effect, which is partly why I think people who've walked with Jesus for so long, right? It's like, and again, I try to be careful. You don't want to diminish spiritual impact. Someone gets saved or whatever. It's like they're just on fire. You want to hear their story and it impacts you, lights you up. But isn't there a difference when someone's like, I've been walking with the Lord for 50 years.
Yeah.
And you just kind of go, there's your difference. And so I don't want to demonize impact, but I do want to say we have to recognize that we do live in a cultural moment that is more obsessed with impact and can tend to, if we're not careful, downplay the role of influence.
Yep.
I mean, I hate to bring this one up, but I think it's true and I think it's uncomfortable. I think youth sports is a great, great question. I think youth sports can have an impact on your kid. But when we trade out youth sports for healthy relationships in church, family, school, what's the influence?
Or it can really impact your kid in the actual sense of the word.
Yep. Yeah, it's just one of those things. Like I just think these are really important concepts to wrestle with, to make sure everything we're doing in life, our technology, our decisions, our engagements, are ran through the filter of what does human flourishing really look like, and what is the target. And so I love the language of like, hey, watch out for the device instrument divide. There's some stuff in your life that might be more device oriented, instrument oriented, and you got to be careful with that. You got to put some limits on that. You got to put that in time out. You got to take that in small doses.
Yeah, need some screen time.
Yep. But like instruments, like, man, shoot, you can probably spend a lot of time on that. It's going to help you go further, but you're not going to diminish what it means to be you, to be human. Right. So it's going to require a lot of human effort. Similar with impact and influence. It's like, hey, we're not advocating live a life with no impact. Like never, I mean, if you want to use the positive usage of the term. In other words, have no high moments. I don't think that's what I would advocate. I would just say, you better make sure you prioritize influence over impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
You better make sure you do that, because if you don't, you'll kind of live like a junkie. You'll go from impact to impact, or God forbid what you just said, an impact will hit your life that's one of the negative kinds, and it will hit you tremendously. I also think that there should be hope for this for people. What if you have been impacted by a adultery and a divorce? What if you have been impacted by abuse? What if you have been impacted by something that was unforeseen and terrible? I think what you should know is we serve a God who can take the negative fallout of impact and invite you into his relational, influential orbit, and over time bring beauty from your ashes. So this is where, why I think he's so eloquent. Wordplay is his skill, and which I like a lot. But I think these are important words, and to think about what they mean.
Yes.
And then how do we properly categorize our engagements in life? And are we thinking soundly and wisely about them? Right? So an example, wouldn't you say that choosing to take your spouse for your 20th anniversary to their favorite worldwide destination might be impactful? Yeah. But would that impact ring hollow if it had no vibrant influence of the 20 years of just daily compounding, boring, faithful marriage?
Yep.
It's not really, to me, an either or, but it's recognizing a first and a second.
Yeah.
Influence is first, it's foremost, it's critical. What my kids need from me is 20 years of influence. It'll have impactful moments, hopefully more good than bad. But it's those impacts are couched within the context of relational influence. Yeah. This is also what I think is the template for beautiful community in the church. It's not to say we should never have some impactful sermons or some impactful events or memories, but it is to say the whoop and wharf of church life and church health is day over day influence. Yeah. And so the thing is, the only people who can speak of the benefit of influence are the people who stay rooted relationally long enough to enjoy it or to see it.
Yeah.
The tumbleweed has no option for influence. It is just an impact arbitrarily being pushed by forces outside itself. But the rooted tree, as you described, it has the benefit of speaking of what influence really looks like.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. The homesickness of our cultural moment is so answered by the Edenic language that Andy is using, and there's the grounding that I'm talking about.
Yeah,
these concepts, these tenets, they build on one another. One of the fun things that he mentioned in the instrument section that I forgot to bring up was the idea that pianos actually have the ability to appreciate and value, that the same piano that was in your family 60 years ago, played by your grandfather, can get beat on by a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, practiced on by a 7-year-old, perfected by an 18-year-old. You can take it into your marriage and pass on to your grandkids, and maybe in 40 years will be worth more than it ever was when it was built. But that is not true of your iPhone.
Yeah.
It will go and die in the landfill. And so much so, though, we see that we're like, okay, I like that. I want that. I want the thing that lasts. And so he says, okay, so if you want impact, what is it that you really want? And we're answering this question. What you really want is influence. But even furthermore, he says that his friend Dave, who's a businessman, he's actually an instrument maker, funny enough. He says, most of us want to be a force, but Jesus calls us to be a taste. And I feel like that is such that is the answer to the uncomfortable reality of evangelism right now.
Yeah, it's great.
Is that we all want the force. We all want the results, the measurements. New people came to Jesus.
Yep.
The thing is we're answering the call to the long, slow, obedient process of becoming the taste, the hands and feet, the presence of Jesus in our world.
Yep. Yeah, I don't disagree with it at all. I think it's good. I think it's just recognizing the limits of these phrases and words. But he's definitely a masterful weaver of words.
He is. He is. All right. Last big idea, charmed versus blessed. Now, before you play with this concept, I want to say this. This is funny. Back when we originally read this book, when it first came out.
It was a couple years ago.
It was a couple years ago, yeah. Specific to the charmed versus blessed idea, you, in your masterful way of summarizing things, sent me a text message. I wish I had it in front of me, but I said, "Wow, yeah, that was one of my favorite sections of the book too. What page was that on?" You're like, "That wasn't in the book. I wrote that." It was, anyways.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, you summarized the charm versus blessed idea, so hopefully you have it down today, just as
Oh,
as
no.
you did a while ago.
Oh, I don't know that I have that, Sean.
What let's ask it in a different direction. How did this idea land with the True Hope staff?
They loved it. I think there was some questions in the room. They were like, well, what's the tactic? So like, I'm like, look, I don't think that what Andy's doing is trying to give you the tactic.
Right.
I think he's trying to give you the telos. That word means meaning or purpose. He's asking telos questions, which is like, why? What's underneath this? We tend to settle for device living when instruments are available. We tend to go from impact to impact when a different, more enduring approach is in influence. Or if you take a positive view of impact, which he doesn't, but if you do, it'd be like the mountain peaks and low valleys that are situated in a longer journey. Charmed is this idea of magic, but with no cost. Charmed is like someone else took you to Disneyland and it was just an amazing mirage. But truly blessed, being blessed, he talks about this quite a bit, comes through struggle. It comes through cost. But the thing is, what you struggle towards and for, when you experience its goodness, it means all the more to you. I guess my example about marriage is probably better suited in the charmed, blessed. Of course, I think all three of these comparisons have overlap.
Right.
Device, instrument, impact, influence, charmed, and blessed. It's like saying a similar thing, but in slightly nuanced ways. So the charm thing is, look at the charm. I can't believe your spouse took you on a great trip to Italy for your 25th. It's like the blessed approach would just be like, man, our life is crescendoed.
Right.
Or like built towards. There's been ups and downs and cost and investment. And this is just, yeah. So we live in a culture that wants charm and we want impact and we use our devices. And I think he's just saying to us, the way of community and the way of God, the way of Christ is instrument, influence, and blessed. The team really enjoyed it. I think they thought it was helpful.
Yeah.
What I would think it's helpful is to help people with community. A lot of people want to find a community group that's actually their addiction to charm. They want deep friends overnight, the first time they show up to a community group and be like, boom, this is my people. We all get along and everything's easy. Really? Nothing valuable, beautiful in life happens that fast. It's like a comment I made from the pulpit a few years ago. I know it was controversial, but I just said, look, some of you want to call up a pastor and get some marriage counseling and have us fix in a few weeks what you've been wrecking for the last 10 years of your life. And so that's the charm culture. It's the pill culture. Take a pill for that. So it's this idea of like, there's a quick fix out there. There's just, all I gotta do is take a pill. All I gotta do is like, go to church once. It's like, no, that isn't gonna do it.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. Like, the blessed life is a direction and a commitment. The influence life is long-term and compounding. And the instrument-driven life is recognizing it just retains all of its humanity. And that is actually the richness we're made for. So
we talked about this specific point back in Genesis as we talked about Jacob wrestling with God.
Yep.
And that is, I think that's the example that he gives here, is it's Jacob desired blessing, but he was trying to accomplish it through his own means, his own striving, his own ambition. But the blessed life is actually a surrendering of the very thing we want so that God can give us the very thing we need.
Yes. Love that.
And to that end, I just say amen. I think we all have our allure to charms. Like, charms are the things that we get when we try to force impact and device with our own will. And there's just plenty of examples. I mean, I think even in my own life and work and career, there's those things where you just feel like you're striving, that you're not truly living by, the ministry of God's presence in your life. And DJ Khaled, he started that whole thing.
The great prophet.
#blessed, right? And it's like #blessed, like, dude, you did that. You know what I mean? Look, well, whatever that even means. Like, you're the one who dropped the song that got really popular, that got all the views, that made the money. Like, and I don't know. I don't really think you're really giving much of that up to God.
Yeah, I mean, the device impact charmed life is quite disastrous. It's disillusioning, and it's destructive in the long run.
Yeah.
It's destructive because it erases humanity and it inhibits community. Right? There's your rubric. If it erases or diminishes your humanness and it puts obstacles in the way of community, human to human community, then it is contra the Shema. That's what his thesis is, and I think he's just trying to say to us, well, gosh, if that's the case, I guess I should do nothing. No. You shouldn't get rid of all technology. You should discern technology and look for it as instrument. In other words, incorporate instrument and resist device. Incorporate influence and stop living off that impact diet.
Right.
Yeah. Incorporate blessing and the full theology of blessing, which isn't a world absent of struggle or pain. It's a world filled with genuine surrender where God gets to fill that and do something beautiful with that. I think that's why it's a great title, The Life We're Looking For. It's like at the end of your life, when you look back, you're not going to say, man, I remember when I got my first iPhone. You're not going to say that. You're going to say, who have I influenced and who has influenced me? What is the sum of my life added up to? Is it a blessing or is it not? And I guess the components of tech that you may have engaged in, the ones that are going to stand out are the ones that enhanced humanity, and those components of influence and blessing not diminished it. So he's just giving you, I think, a reality check of like, hey, technology is advancing super, super quick, but there's trade-offs here, and we got to be cognizant of them right now because they are building us towards something or they're reducing us towards something.
As we kind of move towards wrapping this episode up, maybe we can both just share like one pressing idea it left us with, one tangible. I can give my example as it just so easily comes to mind is as I've been reading this book over the last month. It's almost summer, feels like summer.
Summer.
Yeah, it's summer. Last week we had some rain that really made it feel like early spring just for a brief moment, but we resurrected. It's good. But I've been working on my yard, and I just have to confess, the last few years, I've just not been great about working on my yard. I just kind of like lost the passion for like.
I never found that passion.
Yeah, I know. We're still praying for you.
I don't have that passion.
We all enjoy different instruments, right? So anyways, I've been learning to enjoy the instrument of the rake again. And as I've been out there, we've been at this house for a couple of years now. And the previous guy planted this phenomenal garden, and I had no idea what he planted. And so I went out there, I had my weed whacker, and I was just going to town. I was just weed whacking. I felt like the device I was using was giving me such efficiency. I was like, this is gonna be great. Like this project's gonna be wrapped up in a short amount of time. And I looked down and I saw what was the start of grapes. There's a grapevine that's growing. And so I threw my trimmer to the side and I got down on my hands and knees and I started pulling it back. I'm like, what on earth underneath all these weeds is like this amazing vine growing? I pull it back and pull it back. And dude, there's grapes growing underneath all of these weeds. And I just stopped and the sun was setting. And I was just like, wow. I was like, I almost killed grapes. And it was just the thought of the things I do in life that are truly a device that don't allow me to see the beauty that's growing right in front of me. And one of the other areas that I just felt convicted about that was in the evening, and this partially comes out of the TechWise family. We all know the feeling of trying to get dinner on the table when you get home from work and toddlers run around or whatever. And it's just so easy to turn on the TV or turn on a show or whatever. And it's just, it makes life feel easier. And I just think there's some hidden relationship, not even hidden, it's right there in front of me, of just engaging my son and not necessarily falling for the easy thing. So anyways, that's where my mind's at after coming to the close of this book, is just being aware of the things that I too easily give up because I want the easy.
Yeah, I think it's great. Yeah, I would say I thought about it a lot as a pastor. I think just in a setting where I think relationship and community is crucial. and just recognizing like that same rubric has to be reflected on. Are we becoming more human? Are we being connected to each other? You know, we're at a size where the reality is everybody can't know everybody, but everybody can know somebody.
Right.
And that's important. That's an interesting thing. Not everybody likes that, but the reality is that's a decision. Like everybody can't know everybody. You don't know everybody in your life in general, in the world, in our city, on your block.
Right.
But everybody can know somebody. And I think that knowing somebody and being known by somebody is the telos of human community. And so, yeah, I just think for me is that good reminder of like, I have got to play the long game and continue to construct my own life and also the values of our church to pursue that relationship. So we're trying to do that. We're trying to do that. We're acknowledging like, yeah, it's complicated. There's a whole host of different temptations you have at different structures of size and reality, much like a family, like what you and Abby could do before Jones. And now that you're going to have another one little, you know, what we're going to call him? Let's pick a name.
I would just call him Gizmo.
Gizmo.
That's what we call
when little Gizmo comes and you guys are a family, you know, of 4, then, you know, you have to adapt. But in all of our adapting, we have to have some sort of rubric of values that we go, well, what I don't want to adapt into is an absence of instruments, an absence of influence, and an absence of blessing.
Yeah.
Right. So it takes wisdom in every season. So yeah, I think for me, my mind was on the pastoral side of things. I suppose in my family, you know, it's interesting because I have a son who's looking at colleges and like I'm in a season of like trying to figure out what it means to be a family that's about to have one part of us go live somewhere else potentially. You know, and many people have walked through that and what that looks like and feels like. And so it brings up a whole different host of questions. I guess what I care about then is that he'd someday, Lord willing, recreate a family that he could demonstrate some of these same things. So just interesting how life works as it rolls.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a little housekeeping. It has been so fun this season doing our first 6 episodes of Reading with Ryan
And Sean.
And Sean. Books that we both have. There's not been a single book that I've regretted reading. They've all been
good.
They've been all great. And our heart is we'd love to see this return in some way this fall. But we're just going to take an intentional pause for the
months.
summer to enjoy our families and enjoy beautiful Spokane and have a huge affection for our city. And so we're excited about that. We're excited about our summer of prayer. And maybe it'll just turn into a life of prayer. It won't even stop. It's just it's going to plow right into the fall.
Amen to that.
So thank you for this. Thank you for teaching us, inviting in your library. It's been a pleasure.
Yep. Right on. Thanks,
See ya.
man.